welcome back to another episode of Bard Around Town with your host, Max Forsyth. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, architecture. And more specifically, Shakespeare architecture. Don't know what I'm talking about? Well, you'll be an expert by the end of the episode. This is Tudor Revival. So what is Tudor Revival? Well, it can get a little vague sometimes. I get it confused with English arts and craft and even Victorian. But in actuality, it's a style that is influenced from the Tudor period, 1485 to 1603, which also blends in with the Elizabethan style. Anyways, just as important to look for those high-pitched roofs, tall chimneys, and stucco. Tudor Revival recalls a genteel living of an English countryside manor. So that's why I brought you here to Shaughnessy, a neighborhood built for the affluent society of Vancouver in the early 20th century. Canada's biggest real estate power, the CPR, had a plan. They wanted to redevelop the West End, but that's where Vancouver's most affluent society was living. So they enticed them to Shaughnessy with an aggressive marketing campaign by building wide tree boulevards and giving them huge estates to build their stately manors. Now, let's travel across town. Time to go west. The Brock House in Point Grey. I don't think that's part of the original house. What a nice terrace. Today, the Brock House is an activity center, serving high-quality programs, events, and activities for active older adults. It's a fantastic summer day here at Sunset Beach. Now, the reason why we're in the West End is to talk about Tudor Manor, a perfect example of Tudor style on apartment buildings, built during the Tudor boom of the interwar period in Vancouver. And behind it, rising high above, is the Tudor Tower, built during the post-Expo Tower boom. A classic example of a Vancouver condo tower, tall, skinny, small units, but a great view. When I was doing research for this episode, I was biking around Vancouver looking for the Tudor Revival aesthetic when I stumbled upon this little house. No, not this little house, that little house. That's right. This is the Joy Kogawa House, and it has a much bigger history than I anticipated. This is how it used to look like. Let's go find out what happened. Come with me. All right, and with me today is a very special guest. Her name is Joan, and she's the education coordinator for the Joy Kogawa House. Thank you so much for being with us today, Joan.
Nice to be here.
I really appreciate it. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the history of Joy Kogawa and the history of this house.
Yes. Joy Kogawa is a very renowned Canadian author, Japanese-Canadian author. She is most well known for a novel called Obasan that she wrote in 1981. and it was one of the first works that was published that was about the Japanese Canadian internment experience. Joy lived here with her family in this house for about 5 years, from when she was very young, from 1937, when she was 2 years old, until 1942, when war was declared between Canada and Japan after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Joy and her family were amongst 22,000 people of Japanese descent who were forcibly removed from their homes and sent to internment camps in the interior of British Columbia. So all Japanese people of Japanese descent who lived within 100 miles of the Canadian coastline were forcibly removed and sent to internment camps. She always dreamed about coming back to this house. She had a very, very strong connection. Throughout her life, she had a longing to return to the house, and that was never possible. The house, like all homes and possessions of the Japanese who were sent away during the war, they were not returned to the families. It was caused a great deal of hardship for the entire Japanese community of the time.
The stucco and the Tudor aesthetics was actually added to the house in the 1970s, masking the important history of this place. But there are plans to restore it to its former style, as described in Obasan.
Well, it wasn't until Joy was much older, I think when she was in her 70s, that she returned to Vancouver and found that this house was still standing. It was a very big surprise to her that it was still here, and all these memories of her childhood came back to her. And the house actually happened to be for sale. And there were there was a grassroots committee that formed that realized the significance of this house as being one of the very few that were occupied by Japanese people before the war. Because in this area, in the Marpole area of Vancouver, there were many Japanese families that lived in this area. And there are probably no other houses of that era that belong to the Japanese that are still standing today. And since 2009, the house has been a home for writers. So we've have a writer in residence program at the house now, and we've had people living in the house from all parts of Canada. We've had poets and authors and many different people who have come here and enjoyed Vancouver and enjoyed living at the house as well, in this very inspirational place.
Well, there you have it. Tudor Revival architecture. It's played an interesting role in our city's history, bit of a conflicting history. I'm curious to know what you think. And explore your own neighborhood. Have a look around, because once you start noticing the style, you'll see it everywhere. You yourself might be living in a Tudor house. You might be living in Shakespeare's house. Who knows? The townhouse complex behind me was built just a few years ago in the new dynamic neighborhood of South Canby. So this style isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Hello again. Thank you so much for watching our episode of Bard Around Town. If you want to see more, plus other content from Bard on the Beach, please like and subscribe and hit that bell button, and you'll be notified for more videos. I'd like to thank Lone Tree for sponsoring our videos. I'm enjoying the Pineapple Apple Lone Tree cider, and it's fantastic. I also like to thank the Brock House for letting us come to their beautiful facility, and the Joy Kogawa Society. There we are. It was such an honor coming to this place and learning about the amazing history and the wonderful work the society does. Please look in the description below for links to learn more about these wonderful places. Well, that's all I have for you today. I hope to see you next week on another fun episode of barred around town. See you then.